breaking news, anytime it happens. Bill Bennett's Morning in America.
40 years ago this week, Frampton Comes Alive. I know it could have done some Show Me the Way or Baby I Love Your Way, all the big hits. Wind of Change from Frampton. This was wild. I was in high school. I thought, man, this is just it. Who ever heard of Frampton? Who puts out a live album is the first thing anybody's ever heard of for the most part. But that's how it worked out. And 40 years ago this week, Frampton Comes Alive, released. Big musical history thing, of course, is Elvis's birthday, and we'll have a great gospel number of Elvis's to take us out. But right now, before we are done, we are in the home stretch, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Congressman Tim Murphy from the great state of Pennsylvania, 18th District. Welcome, sir. How you doing?
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
It is wonderful to be with you. Hey, I want to talk about because if you boil down our gun problem, it's like there are people who think it's an inanimate object problem, a firearms problem, or that it's a people problem, a mental health problem. That is the truthful answer, and you've done a lot on that. But first, I just wanted to ask you a little bit of what you thought of last night. You've got an interesting release out about some of what strike you as some of the whoppers the president rolled out last night. What's your favorite?
Well, I guess overall I look at this when the president spoke that I'm not sure he gave us much of anything to move forward on. I mean, this is much of the same distractions. He did not offer real solutions. I think at times he stumbled with answers. He certainly does not address the mental health issue at all. When it comes to these kind of shootings, you have three elements. You have the criminal element, you have terrorist element, and you have mental illness ones. The criminal element, that's where you provide support for prosecutors, for policemen, and that's what you need to do there. When it comes to dealing with terrorism, he's got to be firm and say, yes, there are Islamic jihadist terrorists, and you identify that because what you can't define, you can't defeat, and you go after them. But in the area of mental illness, he repeatedly refuses to get involved in this issue. I find it interesting that last night the National Shooting Sports Foundation was one of the groups invited to be at the town hall meeting. But if you read their press release of why they didn't come, they said it quite well. It says, we remain disappointed that the president has chosen to demagogue the issue for political purposes instead of providing real leadership like working to advance Representative Tim Murphy's bipartisan legislation to address the issue of mental health, which is the common denominator in mass shootings.
Of course it is. And that's obvious. That's obviously true. Just as a kind of stylistic point, though, because I'm battling with this, because the NRA weighed in and said, hey, we would have gotten one pre-screened question. No, thank you. Isn't it better to show up and ask that question? Because Taya Kyle hit a home run. She only got one question, and that's what everybody's talking about. The young lady who was the rape victim. Oh my gosh! She said, "Why shouldn't I be able to protect myself?" She's what everybody's talking about. So they're right that what should have been talked about far more are things like your focus on mental health. But all other things being equal, if you got something that millions of people are going to watch, show up.
I agree. I think it's much better to get out there and make a statement. I would have loved to have time to ask the president a question and have more. He knows that I'm the national leader on this. He knows it because I've said it to him, and he knows that we need his help on this. We could move this forward. He offers instead $500 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but our nation already spends probably overall, mental illness in America costs us close to $500 billion a year. And one of the reasons it keeps getting worse is we are not doing the right thing. The federal government policies are a mess. It's a broken system, and it needs to be overhauled, not just throwing more oil into the tank here and expecting that the car's going to run better. We're not getting treatment to people. We throw them in jail. They remain homeless. They end up in the emergency rooms. They end up in the morgue. You're 10 times more likely if you're mentally ill to be in jail than in a hospital. This system has to be fixed. And all I want is get him engaged in this solution with us. We've got like 47, I think, some Democrats and 100 and some Republicans on our bill now. It's pretty clear there's bipartisan work being done on this, but we sure would like leadership in the White House. In absence of that, we're moving forward. We're going to get a solution to this and get it to his desks and force this solution to come forward.
And there are so many ways to move forward on things that should be bipartisan. When I bring this up, and I think it shouldn't just be conservative agreement, it should be American agreement that this is a mental health problem. I get some interesting questions, and one of the main purveyors, I want to ask you about them. And that's that, okay, if we identify that it's mental health, I get calls from vets who have PTSD or somebody somebody who might have gotten some counseling coming out of a disastrous marriage 10 years ago or something like that, and they say, I'm worried that even if you take mental health and put it in the hands of maybe this regime, that they'll find ways to disqualify you for mental health by placing the bar at a place that would disqualify tens of millions of people.
That's a good point. And I don't know if you know this, but I'm also a psychologist in the Navy. I'm in the Navy Reserve. And although I'm not speaking for Navy policy, I can say this, that when I'm working with soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, who themselves are dealing with struggles of post-war, post-traumatic stress, et cetera, that's one of the issues they bring up. But what the criteria is this, and again, the President misses this, it is a court-related. There's a legal process that takes place if you are found to be a violent threat to yourself or someone else. The President, on the other hand, twists this to say, let's find people who are on disability and deny them weapons. That's when people should be worried, because I work with a heck of a lot of veterans who love to target practice. They love to shoot. They love to go hunting, but they're missing their legs and one arm, or they have other problems going on. What we ought to be looking at is the characteristics of violence. But here's something else that we've got to acknowledge. A person who is seriously mentally ill and is not in treatment is 15 times more likely to engage in an act of violence than someone who is in treatment. So doesn't it make sense we'd get them treatment? But don't just say, well, if they have a diagnosis of mental illness, they must be violent. No, that's not the case. There's no more propensity to violence except for those with serious mental illness who are not in treatment. So, Mr. President, work with us to get treatment for these folks. You want to give them hope? Give them hope of getting better. Instead, the focus is on let's protect their right to refuse treatment. Let's protect their right to to shut down hospitals. And I say, how about their right to get well? Isn't that what real compassion is? And I think that's where a lot of conservatives and, quite frankly, moderates and liberals all saying, wait a minute. We offer treatment for cancer. We don't ban them from things or everything else, but you've got more people dying from mental illness than you have from breast cancer. Why don't we treat this issue? Deal with what it is. It's a brain disease, Mr. President. Let's treat it as such, and don't demagogue that people with disabilities are the problem.
It's funny because these are people who are willing to call anything a disease, even sometimes when it's not. So if we have a real disease, you'd think they'd be more sensitive. What do you think is the hesitation? Is it because if we start to look at human behavior, if we start to look at it as a people problem, the left is concerned about looking like they're blaming folks when it's much easier to blame an inanimate object?
Well, they like to blame society. They like to blame the big machine of things and not have personal responsibility. The thing on this bill, as far as co-sponsors, we've got the founders of the Progressive Liberal Caucus in Congress, as well as some members of the Freedom Caucus. And we have this spectrum of people because when people stop and dissect this issue, they recognize you've got to deal with it as a people issue. But look what the President said last night, and I think this shows his lack of awareness. When he made reference to Adam Lanza, who was the shooter at Newtown Elementary School, a terrible tragedy and I believe preventable. What the President said is he didn't have a criminal record, but he did have access to an arsenal, and that was his quote. But I'm thinking, wait a minute. What he did not have access to was mental health treatment, and his family didn't have access to helping Adam because federal laws block family members from being participants in treatment. That's part of what we need to change. But notice what I'm talking here. The core of the solution is individual responsibility and help with their disease, getting the family involved again. And when you have people out there who don't trust the family, but they trust the government, they don't trust the individual responsibility in helping them through with illness or develop a moral code. Instead, we have to have big government take over for you in the nanny state because we don't trust individuals. I would say the data's pretty clear that approach of the nanny state government ain't working.
No, indeed. When you talk about, just about 2 minutes here, and I want because you've said something so important about Adam Lanza, about that possibly being preventable. If there were a clearer way for families, as you say, to be participants in treatment, which sounds great, and I totally agree. Ultimately, that comes down to a very possibly uncomfortable moment where you've got family members trying to involuntarily commit other family members, and that's the hurdle you got to get over.
It is, and that's why it's a court procedure. If you do have a lot of families, though, that recognize they have a son or a daughter with schizophrenia or bipolar illness or something else where they propensity to violence. The current standard is we're not going to provide them treatment. My bill would say inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, something. We don't have enough psychiatrists, psychologists. We make it very tough for people to access treatment early on. But we do know when you deal with these issues early on, when they begin to emerge in mid-adolescence, young adulthood, you can make a long-term difference in the prognosis. What our country does, we wait till it gets so out of hand that you end up arresting, incarcerating, and the problems get worse over time.
In our literally last minute, Allegheny, Washington, Beaver, Westmoreland counties, Pittsburgh, Steelers, Bengals. What's your call?
Well, Steelers, it's in my heart. I mean, the Bengals clearly have a teamwork that fits better overall and a better record. And my concern is the Steelers don't do so well against teams that play before 500, but do much better against teams that play above. So game on. So I think it's the Steelers.
Wow, because I'm going to agree with you because the Bengals are snake bit, and if Andy Dalton can't win any games, I don't think A.J. McCarron can. Their only hope is to keep the Steelers under like 17 points, and I see a sufficient success from Ben that I think your constituents will be happy. And we are always happy to have you, sir. Thank you for the clarity on the mental health and everything you're doing there, and just your continued service in the Congress since the 2002 elections there in the 18th of Pennsylvania. Just thank you for being with us, and Happy New Year, and look forward to talking to you a lot this year.
Thank you so much, and thanks for shining light on this. Have a great day.
God bless you. Thank you. Congressman Tim Murphy, 18th District of Pennsylvania. Had to throw him a little Steeler action there. Are you kidding me? He's right there from Steeler land. All right, so I guess I've sort of given away one call there. I think the Steelers will beat Cincinnati. But what about the other three games? We approach it from interesting ways here in the Claude, Chris, and me community. We'll wrap a couple of things up, take a look at the 4 playoff games moving forward. And I asked them I gave the guys at the beginning of the show, I said, if you could just wave a wand right now and make a Super Bowl, boom. Because there are, 12 teams that are up for it right now? What Super Bowl would you like to see the most? I have mine. I'll ask the boys next. And we'll get out of here for our first Friday in 2016, this January 8th. 866-680-6464. We may have time to wedge in a final call or two. Follow me on Twitter, @Mark Davis. Christmas is over, but it's still a great gift at Amazon for you or anybody else. Lone Star America, how Texas can save our country, how some of the logic that's been around for 20 years in my state might help all 50 states. So if you're going to grab a Lone Star America, go ahead and do that. It's there on Amazon for you. And I'm here for all of y'all next as we wrap up with the Friday edition of Bill Bennett's Morning in America next.
Is for you all night.